ready.
In the previous video, we saw how we set up Docker container for local development. Whenever we made any changes to the source file, we had to rebuild the image and then redeploy the container. This is obviously not the most convenient way of doing things. A second way of going about doing it would be to actually set up a development environment where you can edit the files using your host, the host computer, and automatically be able to reflect the changes into the Docker container. How do we go about doing that? Let's examine that in more detail in this video. As a first step, in order to achieve this, we would like to install the nodemon module into our project. Nodemon allows us to watch the source files and then automatically restart the node server whenever the files are changed. So to do that, let's go to package.json and then install nodemon in here. So I will say dev dependencies and install nodemon, which I will be installing the 1.18.11 version of it, which is the latest version at this moment. Next, we would like to bind mount the source folder in our host into the container. Now, bind mounting allows you to mount any local folder on your host into the container. Thereby, if you make any changes to the local folder in your host, then the changes will also be seen by the container itself. So to help us do that, let me set up a Docker Compose file here. I'm going to use Docker Compose for this. You can use Docker run and then mount the folder using the volume, but I'm going to use Docker Compose to make it more easier for me to set this up. We'll set up the version as 3.7, and then we'll set up the services and also volumes here. And one of the volumes that I'm going to set up would be named as node modules. I'm going to explain to you how we'll make use of the node modules. For the services itself, we will define the service as the node app service, and we build that using the local folder as the context. So here you see that by specifying this, you're ensuring that the image will be built using the local folder as the context. And also when the image is used to launch the container, then the corresponding command that we are going to use is nodemon.bin/www. Now, here, the command that we specify here in the Docker Compose file will override the CMD that is specified in the Docker file. So this is the command that is going to be used when Docker Compose is used to launch the container. Next, we will expose the port 3000, and also we'll mount the volumes here. The first volume that we're going to mount is we're going to mount the local source folder on our host into home node app folder here. By doing this, we are ensuring that the source code of our node application, which is in the current folder, will be bind mounted into the container, so that whenever we make any changes to any of the source files, it will be automatically seen by the container. So I'll talk about bind mounting in more detail in the next video. In addition, I am also going to mount the node modules volume at home node app node modules folder. So this way, the node modules folder inside this home node app folder is now mapped into this volume, and it'll be any changes that you make will be saved into this node modules volume and will be remounted into the container at this location whenever we restart the container. So that way, whenever we do an npm install, the changes to the node modules folder will be persisted in this node modules volume. Now, this will ensure that the node modules folder that is seen by the node server in the container is different. So in case we do a local install on our host and create a node modules folder, that will not get mapped into the container. Now, the reason for doing this is that it is quite possible that the host on which we are running this container may be a different architecture. As example, in my case, I am running Docker on a Mac. So the node modules that is installed on my Mac, if I do an npm install, might contain some executables that is specially designed for the Mac. And if this gets mounted into the Docker container, which is running Linux, then it may not work. So by mounting the volume here, the node modules volume here, we are ensuring that the node modules that are accessible inside the container is specific to the Linux operating system that is running in the container. Let's now save the changes and then go ahead and do Docker Compose up to launch our container. Going back to the terminal, let's do Docker Compose up -d to launch the container. And you would see that the image will be rebuilt and will launch the container. And once that is launched, we can look that up in our Docker dashboard, and you can see that my Node app is running there. Let's open this in the browser. Going to the browser, let me go ahead and say localhost :3000, and you can see that the server is up and running. Let's now go back to the source and then edit the index.js file. So the moment I make changes to the index.js file and then save the changes, my nodemon should have noticed that there is a change in the source code and then should have restarted my node server. Now, when I go back to the browser and then reload the page, you can see that the change that I've made to the index.js file is reflected in the browser here. Going to the dashboard, if I now click on the logs, you can see that the first time I access the server, the root folder was served up by Express server here. And when I made changes to the source file, you see that the node server was restarted and my subsequent access to the server served up the updated file there. What is important for you to note is that the file was edited by me on my Mac, And this change was immediately reflected into the container because the source folder was bind mounted into the container, and thereby the node server running on the in the container noticed the change to the source file and immediately restarted the server there. Now let me go ahead and undo the change and then save the modified file. And you would notice that again, the node server would have been restarted and the updated source file has been used when the server was relaunched. Now note again, to reiterate the point to you, I am editing the files on my Mac here, but the changes are immediately reflected into the container. Now this is the proper way of setting up local development environment using the Docker container on your computer. This is the most convenient way of setting this up. Also, the reason I am using Docker Compose is that if you set up a full stack web application with the front end, the Node.js server, and a database server, typically using MongoDB, then Docker Compose allows us to automatically launch all the containers for the front end, the Node.js server, and the database server all at the same time. We're going to look at that aspect in the next video.